Hello, I'm Jim Hessler, the founder of Path Forward Leadership, and today I want to talk to you about something called SHOC, S-H-O-C. SHOC is one of the mental models that we use in our Path Forward Leadership Workshop program, and it's also just something that has a lot of value on its own, whether you're part of one of our workshop programs or not. SHOC is developed by Steve Matenko. Steve is a business partner and a friend of mine who put this together. What it is it's a model for challenging or crucial or critical conversations. And it's just some guidelines. It's some things to keep in mind. It's not a sequence. It's not a step-by-step plan. It's just some things to have in your mind and your spirit kind of as you go into a challenging conversation. Now that conversation can be one in which you're giving feedback. It can be one in which you're receiving feedback. It can be anytime you want to challenge the status quo, anything where you feel like there's some heft and some criticality to the interaction between you and the other person. These are just some really good principles to keep in mind. So first of all, the S stands for specific, and what it means is that when we're raising an issue with anyone, now let's put it into a feedback context for a minute. If I wanted to point out that you've been late for work several times in the past week, I wouldn't want to start that conversation by saying you're irresponsible, or you don't get it, or I can't trust you. All I really want to do to begin with is compare facts. Now, those of you that have learned the ladder of inference from us understand that this is the journey we take. We tend to jump up very quickly into assumptions and conclusions about things. And what we really need to have a good conversation is to point out what we saw, what we actually saw, rather than what we assumed or concluded about what we saw. So if I wanted to speak with someone about tardiness, I would want to start with specific examples of when they were tardy, how long it was before they showed up for work, and I would start simply by sharing that information. Rather than making any other forays into their character or their habits or anything else. I just want to start off with a specific statement. This really helps prevent people from getting back on their heels and getting defensive because they don't feel attacked quite so much. You're just sharing factual information with them. The H in the SHOC treatment stands for honest. And this honesty exists really on two levels. The first thing you want to do in any critical conversation is to be honest with yourself about what intentions you're bringing to that conversation. If you want to use that conversation to beat someone up or show them who's boss or fix what's wrong, you might want to reconsider your intention before you enter into this sort of a conversation. So be really honest with yourself. Bring your best self to the conversation and be honest with yourself about your intentions. Obviously, it also indicates the honesty that we need to have with the other person. We need to be honest with them about what's at stake. We need to be honest with them about the way that their behavior or their decisions are impacting you or other members of the organization. This is not a time to shy away from what needs to be said, while also keeping in mind that you try to keep it as much as you can within the context of specific activities. The person may simply not be aware of how their behaviors or activities are impacting others. We're all guilty of that, right? We all go through life sometimes and don't understand the wake that we leave behind us. Being honest with somebody about that is sometimes very helpful to them, but it also helps you get your point across. The O in the SHOC treatment stands for outcome focused. Now, what this really means is we don't want to be talking about the past as much as we want to be talking about the future. So rather than rehashing or interpreting or punishing in this conversation. We want to just say what's going to be different going forward, what needs to be different, either from my end or your end. And how can we make agreements here? How can we come to some sort of conclusions together about what we can commit to and what we can hold each other accountable to going forward? So always be thinking forward. It may be necessary to talk about the past. It may be necessary to point out these specific incidents or patterns. But what we really want to do is use these kinds of conversations as a way to find a path forward, if you will. And then the C is curious. When we enter into a conversation, a critical conversation, we often think that we know the truth before we go in, and it's our job in the conversation to share our truth with that other person. Often, those of you that are good coaches and have these sorts of conversations regularly and habitually, I'm sure you'll all agree with me that you often find out things in the conversations that you weren't aware of. And if you're not open to that, if you're not open to some of the background, perhaps some information that you don't have about where that person is or what's going on in their sphere of influence, then you're bringing judgments into the conversation that you may hold on to. You may it may be difficult to change your mind about things. So show up curious, show up believing that you may not know everything that you need to know about this particular person or this situation or this pattern of behavior. And this also will, if you take a curious stance, keep in mind that you don't want to ask questions unless you're willing to listen to the answer. So be careful of rhetorical questions, be careful of argumentative questions. Being curious means that you're asking a question that you don't know the answer to, and that you're actually open to whatever you hear in response. So this is SHOC. It's a simple model. And again, it's not do this, then this, then this, then this, but these are just 4 principles, 4 foundations to keep in mind. Whenever you're talking about something that might have some emotion or some defensiveness or some relationship electricity attached to it. And it's just a really good model that our clients have found helpful for many years to have those conversations more successfully. The quality of your conversations it speaks directly to the quality of your relationships. If you're not having great conversations and you're not having critical conversations, you're not having a great relationship. So if you really want to be a relationship-driven leader, you need to learn to do this well. Thank you.